Thanks for the invite, Phil. This is it's good to join and participate in the community events. You know, I've done some in Edinburgh and Glasgow, being closer to where I am. But you know, it's great that I guess in the times that we're living in at the moment, we can do these things remotely. So I'll hopefully see and meet some of you all soon. My name's Darren Small. I'm one of the technical specialists at Microsoft. My focus is the hybrid portfolio, which is predominantly for me the Azure Stack family, as well as Azure Arc as well, and that's essentially the focus of the next 45 minutes or so.
You've put yourself on mute, Darren.
That's strange. I think I've hit the space bar and managed to stick myself on mute. Sorry about that, schoolboy error.
Yes.
So I hadn't really started. I was just saying that. So at Microsoft, we've always understood hybrid. Azure has actually got hybrid in mind. When it seems like everything is destined for public Azure, and where we still feel that, of course, if your workloads can move to Azure, or you can utilize public Azure, then that's probably the best destination for your workloads. But we also understand that that's not always possible for many reasons, actually. And and this slide's kind of portraying some of that understanding that that we have at Microsoft. Our customers are, they've got hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of applications spread across VMs, physical servers, multiple database estates, even now, having containerized applications and serverless workloads across many different types of partner solutions and development models. These applications are then usually deployed on diverse infrastructures. So whether customers, partners own their own data centers, they're renting co-location space, they've got service providers providing services, so that diverse infrastructure. And then kind of finally here, we also get that customers have, some of them have multi-cloud strategies, and that kind of ticks, where I see that is kind of ticking boxes for, regulatory and data sovereignty requirements and so on, which is kind of a lot of the time is where I spend a lot of, it's just where I spend a lot of my time being in the hybrid space. So at Microsoft, we understand that. Come on, there we go. So some of the reasons why our customers choose a hybrid strategy, just kind of down the right-hand side here: regulatory and data sovereignty, like I've mentioned, low latency and edge workloads, application and data center modernization. So you'll see a theme throughout, the next 45 minutes or so, where these use cases show up across the different solutions that we have within the hybrid portfolio. And hopefully I can bring to life some of each of these, so from a regulatory space, types of customers are doing what, low latency, and that's again one of the key areas where, even a round trip, it's nothing to do with regulatory or data sovereignty, but just an intermittent or challenging connection could be or a kind of round trip to Azure from on-premises could be challenging, or you might have an ultra low latency requirement for your application, something like some sort of predictive maintenance or worker safety type use case, we see in the kind of low latency bracket, but we'll go into that in more detail. So with that, I think I've mentioned some of this already. So we have at Microsoft that understanding of hybrid, and we're allowing customers or helping our customers innovate anywhere with that. So it's not just in our our many regions across the globe in public Azure data DCs, but bringing Azure really to where the customer needs to be met. So whether that's on premises and edge, we can mean by on-premises and edge as well as we go along, but we can put a single control plane across across these estates, and that's where Azure Arc comes in, which is going to be part of the talk tonight as well. So we talked a bit about customers with many multi-cloud strategies or have existing workloads across multiple public clouds or even on premises across their data centers. And again, we're currently offering and continuing to innovate and invest to bring those Azure native services and single control plane across those diverse infrastructures, and that's any infrastructure anywhere as well. Quick one just about some of the enterprise customers we've got, that have a hybrid strategy right now. So these customers are, some of our biggest customers in public Azure, but also have a hybrid strategy as well at the same time. So where yes, as much of those applications and as much of that data that we can get into public Azure, again, that's the destination, if possible. There's usually with these kind of diverse and complex infrastructures, there's usually an element of on-premises that need to remain. So how can we offer a consistent cloud experience from a commercial and a technical perspective, actually, across cloud and on-premises? That's what we're doing with our hybrid portfolio. And actually, when I talk about we'll go into that in more detail. So first up is a single control plane with Azure Arc. Now, just before we dig into this in too much detail, we're going to talk about the Azure Stack family as well. But I want to kind of get the picture across that hybrid from Microsoft is not just the Azure Stack family. It's not just Azure Arc. It's not a single solution. We should think about it as an ecosystem of solutions, and it really is for us about understanding, what's the customer, what's the challenges that you've got, what problems are you trying to solve, and then work our way back from public Azure, across our hybrid estate. And we really do feel that we differentiate really in the market here with with our hybrid understanding, but also I guess importantly as well is the actual solutions that we've got today within that portfolio. So Azure Arc is it's a relatively new service, so it's there's some announcements coming next week. I think it's next week, Ignite conferences. So I'll keep an eye out for that. If you haven't already registered, I would suggest that you recommend you go and register and catch some of the on-demand sessions or even some of the live sessions as well. It's one of the conferences I look forward to every year. Lots and lots of good announcements, and absolutely within the hybrid space. I know there's a few of that coming, so keep an eye out for that. So Azure Arc was announced actually last Ignite, so it was last September time. It might even have been November, I think September or November, where we announced Azure Arc. So it's been around for a while in preview for some of these services. So it comes in 3 buckets essentially. So there's what we can see on screen here is organize and govern across environments. So being able to onboard servers, whether they're physical machines or VMs, onboard them to Azure Arc, onboard them to Azure essentially, and have governance and security across that estate. And I'm going to show some demos on what that actually looks like. Second bucket is about at-scale Kubernetes app management. So very similar to the server estate, we can onboard Kubernetes clusters wherever they are. So on any infrastructure anywhere, as long as you can have you can have a connection directly or by proxy or by some other means to Azure, then you can onboard those Kubernetes clusters and start to programmatically programmatically start to do things with those clusters and start to then have that cloud native experience that we're promising with our hybrid portfolio. So things like again, security and governance, and start to take advantage of a more kind of cloud native DevOps techniques, and I'll show you some of that as well in a few minutes. And the third bucket here for Azure Arc is data services anywhere. This comes in a couple of flavors actually. So there's specific onboarding of SQL servers. So think about SQL servers as infrastructure as a service. VMs, SQL servers you might deploy on Windows servers running on a VMware estate or on a Hyper-V estate or some other platform. And we can then deploy an agent. We can onboard those SQL servers to Arc, and we can start to take advantage of, native Azure services where there's been huge investment. So things like Azure Security, right, where there's over $1 billion of investment each year, almost 4,000, I believe, probably more than that now, of dedicated staff to to run our, and to kind of govern our security estate, you can start to then take advantage of some of that. Again, Azure native services and security for services and VMs and SQL and data platforms that are running outside of Azure, because we're onboarding with Arc. That's that single control plane. Data services anywhere is also about, which is one of the really cool things. That, again, another cool offering from Arc is as a service SQL offering. So we have two flavors right now. So we have SQL Server managed instances, or SQL Server Edge, depending on how familiar you are with it. And we also have Postgres Hyperscale. So we, from an as a service data offering, we can offer that on any platform anywhere. There's one prereq. There's a few prereqs, but the main prereq is that it's containerized, right? So we need a Kubernetes platform to run these data platforms on. But once we have that, and that of course can be in Azure, then we have that single control plane for cloud native or Azure native solutions running on any infrastructure anywhere. So let's just try and bring some of that to life. So first of all, go into a demo on a single control plane with Azure Arc. So this is the first bucket. So this is the organizing and governing resources at scale. So if you think about those, that slide I had with the multiple applications and multiple diverse infrastructures, think about that in this type of scenario and how this might help you consolidate those, pull them together, and start to have a consistent experience and governance policy across all of that estate. I talked about how they show up as Azure resources when they're onboarded to Azure Arc. We're going to see that. So what that enables is, you can then start to adopt developer cloud practices, but it's on premises. And actually on premises on any platform anywhere. So it doesn't have to be the Azure Stack family, which we'll talk about in the second portion of this talk tonight. And then implement Azure Security anywhere. So we've got things like role-based access control, access to policies, logs, log analytics, and so on. So with that, there's a couple of use cases and scenarios and the fixes for those scenarios. I think I've talked about those, but let me just switch. So I'll just give that a second or two. Hopefully that refreshes quite okay. So what I've done here is I've just switched to the Azure portal to give you a quick overview, a quick demo of that first bucket. So inside the Azure portal, we can just simply browse or search for Arc. And when we bring up Azure Arc, we've got those three buckets that I had described very briefly on the previous slide. So I'm going to focus on the first one for now. So this is about onboarding VMs and servers to Azure Arc that's deployed on any infrastructure anywhere. Actually, before I get into that, you can see that there's actually Arc is now starting to be padded out, which I guess is showing the investment and the how much of a priority our hybrid portfolio is. Actually, it was only just that past few days that I've noticed that Stack HCI and data controllers are starting to show up here as well. These are going to be announced properly at Ignite next week, so there's some early insights here. So I don't have a demo, but I'll take you through these anyway. But it just shows that again, from an Azure Arc and extending Azure anywhere, you can see the investment here. So Arc for servers. So let's onboard or go through the steps on what we would do to onboard a server. So there's some prereqs here. So there's, first of all, you need access to the internet or access via 443, I guess, to certain outbound URLs for the agents essentially to register against and start to onboard to public Azure, and then of course local admin on those servers as well. What you will need is an Azure subscription and an existing resource group. So I'm just using my Microsoft internal, but that can be of course one of your own. Resource details. Now you can start to see the Azure consistency, right? Because this is Azure at the end of the day. So think, you used to deploy in a virtual machine. Very, very similar experience. So pick a subscription, pick a resource group, pick a region, and these regions are being added to all the time as well. Pick an operating system, Windows or Linux, right? Kind of self-explanatory, and then does the VM or server that you're onboarding need a proxy server to speak to the internet? So you can add that here. Tagging, hugely valuable. If you think about how, how such a, I think such a kind of simple tool can be extremely powerful in Azure. But I think even more so, or it starts to show real value in Arc for, think about, if you think about infrastructures on VMware, Hyper-V, AWS, anywhere across multiple physical locations, across, so it's Manchester, Glasgow, London, doesn't matter. You can start to tag those, those essentially Azure resources or the VMs that you've onboarded to Azure with key value pairs. And then we can, again, programmatically start to do things with that data. All within Azure, by the way. So you can see I'm still in the Azure portal here. So what that's going to do is generate a script based on previous data that I've given it, so subscription types and so on. Now you can either download and run that directly, or you can just run the lines here straight on the machine itself. If you've got multiple, so if you've got hundreds of machines you want to onboard, then of course we can help you automate that as well, and that's there's another piece here to onboard at scale. So it will help you build out an ARM template essentially that with some PowerShell that helps you onboard multiple VMs or multiple servers at a time. So with that, I run that, and then that's me. I'm going to just skip back a second and just jump into the server. So once I've ran that script, my machines show up. So like you can see here, so these are actually VMs that are running on an Azure Stack Hub that I've got in the UK, one of our kind of UK sites. Now, this could be VMware, it could be Hyper-V, it could be even AWS or Google, it doesn't matter. It's agent-based. So I've onboarded them. They look like Azure VMs because essentially they are now Azure VMs. They are in a resource group, they're connected, you get the status and so on. Tagging would be here as well, of course, if you've tagged them. So let's just drill into one. So again, this is, if you're familiar with Azure, then you're familiar with this. This is, essentially same experience, a consistent experience because it's Azure at the end of the day. But this is a VM. Remember, this is a VM, a Windows VM that's running outside of Azure. It's this is actually, it's running on Azure Stack Hub. But if you think about that being running on a VMware platform, like I said, or some other platform. So we've got activity logs. This is where the security and governance starts to take effect. So activity log, role-based access control, tagging we've talked about a little bit. But where a lot of the real power is in things like the Azure policies. So Azure policies native to Azure that you're using on resources essentially that's running outside of Azure. So this is what we mean when we talk about hybrid, when we talk about how we are extending Azure to anywhere where the customers need to be met. This is where it starts to come into to real effect now. So some of the Azure policies, I've got a couple of policies here, some very, very basic ones. They start very basic, like old kind of GPO style policies, to some more in-depth policies for remediation tasks like installing scripts and agents and remediating non-compliance states. So if I just drill into one as an example, what is this one? So this is do not have the specified PowerShell modules installed. So if I've got a bunch of machines, I want the Azure Stack PowerShell modules, I want some Azure PowerShell the Azure PowerShell modules installed, and if it runs the policy against my machines, and if it doesn't have the modules, then I'm non-compliant. And we can create remediation tasks here as well, so we can go and install the agents and so on. So hugely powerful, and that's just with Azure policies. Let me just skip back a level here. It's easier to add a policy. It's as simple as assign a policy. We can assign it to a subscription or a resource group. So if I assign it to a resource group, anytime I onboard, so I can create a resource group as an example, saying it's Glasgow, or one saying Manchester, and I've onboard all my Glasgow resources that sit outside of Azure into that resource group. I can then apply a policy to that resource group. Policies are in here, so you can fit, lots and lots of predefined policies. You can write your own, of course, but lots of predefined ones. So if you can say some for virtual machines as an example, you can see some of the stuff we can do here by default. So hugely powerful tool is Azure Policies. That's one benefit. Let me just skip back here, come out here. Something that was added during preview, which is now in public preview, is extensions. So extensions, very similar to agents and enabling services inside Azure. So I can add extensions to a VM or server running outside of Azure from inside of Azure. Hopefully you're still following. And by the way, please jump in if there's any questions or something you're unsure about. Please jump in. So there's some default extensions already. These will be added to as time goes on. But one really powerful one already is log analytics. So this is log analytics here. So I've installed this extension, on a VM that's not running in Azure to enable log analytics. Once I've enabled log analytics, I can then start to check logs, right? So this is going back to the huge investment that Microsoft makes in security each year. You can take advantage of that for resources, VMs that are running outside of Azure on any platform. So let me just give you a quick example of that. I'll go to a query. So this is a VM, so I can jump down to VMs. This might not work actually because I've only just powered this on, but you can see here there's a whole bunch of queries from log analytics that's there by default. So what's the machine free disk space on my machine that's running outside of Azure? And I'm getting this from tools that's native to Azure. So I can run this. And yes, nothing from the 24 hours. That's my fault, but you can see the power here already, hopefully. Some of the other cool things here from Arc for servers is update management, inventory, and change tracking. So update management. So if you're familiar with Azure Automation, then you can have you can log into you can subscribe to essentially a work group. I can't remember, the name escapes me now. And you can what you can do is you can essentially have a patch management across your Linux and Windows estate that's outside of Azure, but again, using native tools that's inside of Azure. So all the stuff that you would expect to patch and keep up to date, your Windows and Linux estate for your Azure VMs, you can now start to utilize for that estate that's outside of Azure as well. Again, this is the example of, hybrid, from a Microsoft perspective. This is Azure Hybrid. Inventory and change tracking, very similar as well. So do you want to know what's going on? Something's happened on a machine that's sat outside of Azure. You want to know what's happened there. So you want to, see what's happened and who's done what. I'm going to pause there because I think I've taken 25 minutes or so just on this first piece. So any questions so far? We're making sense?
There's one in the IM, Darren. Okay. What's a real-life business example for the use of Azure Arc?
What's a real-life business example for Azure? I think for me, what I'm seeing is there's customers that have a cloud vision, right? They have a public Azure vision, but they have those diverse infrastructures. They're maybe not ready for public Azure for sometimes many reasons, whether it's their own they're not ready from a people perspective, skills perspective, or it might be back to regulatory and data sovereignty, or even kind of historic legacy or heritage type workloads. We can start to utilize investment that's already been made in data center estates, on-premises estates, wherever they might be, that's not in Azure, but utilizing a lot of that cloud native and cloud innovation with Arc to those non-cloud deployed resources, and it gets them on that journey now today. With the bar to entry here is really low. So if you think about these VMs here, these VMs are running outside of Azure, but I can programmatically start to do things with those. So I can start to build out ARM templates and so on. This is native to Azure, right? So I'm cloud native by incorporating Azure Arc to investments that's already been made outside of Arc and get on that journey to cloud today, essentially. A bit of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that makes sense. That's my experience right now anyway. I have a similar answer when it comes to the Stack family too, if I'm being honest. So we'll get there. Okay, I'm burning through time massively here, so I'm gonna just jump quickly into the second bucket, which is Kubernetes clusters, without going back to the slide deck. So I talked about Kubernetes clusters, management of these Kubernetes clusters at scale. So you could have Kubernetes clusters again on multiple platforms anywhere across the globe. You can start to consolidate those with Arc as well. So I'll show you that. So this is a and you can see here that it's let me just jump back a slide here. So the Kubernetes clusters is managed from the Kubernetes service in Azure. So if you're familiar with AKS or the Azure Kubernetes service, then it's managed from within the same place. So if I could just search for Kubernetes, jump into Kubernetes services. So I've got an AKS cluster here that is native to public Azure, it's a Kubernetes service. And you can see here I've got two Kubernetes clusters that actually run outside of Azure. These, again, from being transparent, are on my Azure Stack Hub, but these could be running on VMware, Hyper-V, and so on. Same types of scenarios as before. So if I have a look at this one, very similar type options here. So I'm not going to go into actually I will jump into policies quickly, because there are some default policies you can utilize. So same concept applies, but some of the policies that you can have by default for you, just search for Kubernetes. There's a whole bunch of pre-built policies for Kubernetes clusters, aimed for Azure initially, but you can now start to utilize these for Kubernetes clusters outside of Azure. Let me just jump back a section here as well. So log analytics and so on, very similar, as the servers. So I won't go into too much detail on that. Another one I wanted to point out is configurations. So this is where you can start to, again, programmatically take a cloud native approach or a DevOps approach even to all of those Kubernetes clusters, or those containerized applications that are running on those clusters on diverse infrastructure. So if I see here, I can add a configuration. My configuration is actually looking at this GitHub repo. So anytime I onboard essentially anytime I onboard a Kubernetes cluster into Arc, I can then start to programmatically again do things with that. So take a DevOps approach from a consistent central application repository, essentially. And actually so I've got some links here that I'll send around afterwards. So this is public, so if you want to have a play around with that, I'd advise you to go and have a look. So it's all there and available to you. So if you want to have a play around with the cluster config, or even the servers piece that I showed you before, it's all available in preview now. So there's no cost. That might change for servers next week, so after Ignite announcements, but go and have a look. So that's Kubernetes. Make sense? Any questions on that? I think we're good. Okay. So the last piece on Arc that I wanted to show, actually I don't have a demo because it is in private preview. Actually, in saying that, it's now not in private preview. So this has been enabled since the last time I looked. It's been enabled pre-Ignite next week. So I'm not sure if this is just my Microsoft preview account or if this is the same for everyone. So bear that in mind. But the experience that I've had before was a little bit more manual than this, so it's great to see this now. But this is essentially how we add an as a service data offering to any infrastructure anywhere from Azure Arc. So those SQL Server managed instances or the Postgres hyperscale on any infrastructure. The prereq being a Kubernetes platform so that we can run those containerized data offerings on. So it's as simple as clicking add, running through the prereq. So you can see here, prereq being a Kubernetes cluster, access to the cluster, context to the cluster. And then we install, so using Azure Data Studio, we install a data controller, essentially, and then we onboard. So very similar process. We run through the prereqs, it deploys it, it will spit out a script that you can run on your Kubernetes platform. Essentially, we can then start to onboard those as a service data offerings. Now, excuse me, just going to switch back just quickly to the slides. So the data offering, is here somewhere. I've managed to not be able to find it, but essentially what the key benefits to the data offering on Azure Arc is it's always up to date, right? So there's no end of support. It's cloud native, so we're getting scale. We're getting scale up, scale out experience, and we've got a consistent kind of cloud commercial model as well. So you pay for what you use essentially. From a commercial perspective. So this is just the data services here at the end. So that's Arc. I'm aware that that was a very quick run through. As it's a hybrid session, I wanted to, Arc is kind of central and one of our key services these days, and will continue to. We have very cool offerings now, as you can see, and that will continue to evolve as time goes on. But again, a hybrid for us is all about extending Azure to where you need to be met from a data and kind of regulatory perspective. With that, I'm going to jump quickly. I've got 15-20 minutes, Phil. Take it to 20 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. That's right. I was trying to find the mute.
That's okay. Sorry, I put you on the spot there.
I think we can be flexible with the time. Because we have a short break after this, but we can shorten the break a little bit. That's okay. Carry on, Darren.
Okay, no problem. As long as everyone's engaged, we're good, and I'm not boring anyone. So that's Azure Arc. I wanted to move into the Azure Stack portfolio. So if anyone's been familiar with Azure Stack in the past or heard about it, it's what is now referred to as Azure Stack Hub. So nothing's changed from a what it is and how it's deployed perspective. So if you've been familiar with it before, it's the same. The point I wanted to kind of get across tonight is that, like I said, from a Microsoft perspective, hybrid isn't any one solution. It is, an ecosystem, a family, a portfolio, if you will, of solutions that extend Azure to anywhere. So Azure Stack Hub, first in the portfolio is well, actually, we'll talk about it in the next slide. Stack HCI is relatively new in the sense that we've had Azure Stack HCI GA for a couple of years. I'd say about 18 months or so now. We have a new version of Azure Stack HCI, which I'll talk about in more detail. It's in preview right now. Should be GA by the end of the year, hopefully. And then we have Azure Stack Edge, which is a Microsoft hardware as a service edge compute platform. So it's really about bringing compute to those IoT, AI, kind of modern AI, ML type workloads. So managed from Azure, ordered, consumed, and managed from Azure essentially. So let's dive in a bit more detail on each of those. I'm sorry, these are probably going to be slides rather than some demos here, but hopefully we can follow. So Azure Stack Hub is a purpose-built, a purpose-developed autonomous cloud platform. So what we mean by that is that it's an appliance-like black box. It is Azure. So it's not a version of Azure. It is Azure in a box, essentially. So think about it as being able to deploy an Azure region within your full control. So it has everything that it needs to run Azure on-premise. Actually, let me just go back a slide so we can just kind of refresh our memory on what it looks like. So it's a rack of hardware. This is at its biggest form. So this is a minimum of 4 nodes. So it's a minimum of 4 compute nodes, a maximum of 16 in a single, what we call scale units, essentially a cluster. And we can have multiple scale units as well. We have multiple SKUs, so various to fit various kind of performance. What you need various SKUs, and we have various form factors as well. So fitting a rack of hardware in some of these kind of remote locations isn't possible. So we have smaller form factor and ruggedized tactical versions as well. So with that, so it's a complete autonomous cloud. What we mean by that as well is that it can be run connected or disconnected. It has everything that it needs to run Azure. So there's a bunch of virtual machines that run under the hood, and some containers as well, actually, that give you Azure on-premise. So we can be connected to being able to register and be billed in a kind of cloud consistent manner with Azure, or we can be disconnected. So for those use cases that have to meet specific tight regulatory or data sovereignty needs, have to be air gapped, we can run Azure Stack Hub in a disconnected fashion and still bring all the innovation of Azure. So infrastructure as code, ARM templates, native Azure services on Stack Hub within your control. And that kind of leads us into this next piece here about the consistent app development and operations. This is Azure. It comes with the Azure API, so the Azure Resource Manager, and it comes with all those virtual machines that's running under the hood. Give you, all of the Azure fabric that you need to run a cloud platform. So it's true infrastructure as service, true infrastructure platform as a service at the same time. Now, I mentioned that software defined under the hood, and we've got a bunch of those VMs. You don't get access to those, and that's by design. If you think about public Azure, you don't get access to our data centers or see the infrastructure, or see the VMs, or any infrastructure that make up, each of the hundreds of or thousands of clusters that give you hundreds of Azure services. We want to bring as much of that same experience as we can with Stack Hub, albeit it is still a rack of hardware with services that runs in your data center. So there are still some operational responsibilities, but not many, and that's by design. We want to give you the time back on your development, on your your business or your customers, by focusing on the application layer and less on the infrastructure layer, same as you would in public cloud, public Azure. I talked about how it's a purpose-built integrated system, so there is a relationship here with the hardware partners. So there's a select few chosen hardware partners where it is purpose-built from hardware validated against software and vice versa, all the way through to support and management, if you want management, but certainly through support. So that's something to bear in mind. It works well. You can utilize existing relationships, existing existing kind of contracts that you have as well. I guess with the hardware partners, we see a lot of customers that benefit from an existing discount or so on. But the relationship's there, and it's key to the success of Azure Stack Hub. So some of the use cases kind of down the right hand side here, you've seen these before in a previous slide when it comes to all things hybrid. Absolutely true for Stack Hub. So it can be disconnected or connected to fit regulatory and data sovereignty needs. If you have a latency requirement for an application that a round trip to Azure is going to be a problem, then we can still have the innovation of Azure with those Azure native services on premises on Stack Hub, but within your control, and closer to where the data is being generated. And then application modernization. This is where a lot of our customers are, kind of going back to the answer I gave on a real kind of scenario for, a Arc. Similar here, so customers they have an Azure vision, but they cannot utilize Azure for one of many reasons. If it's regulatory, latency required, data sovereignty, they can go on that journey to Azure now with Azure Stack Hub, because Azure Stack Hub is Azure at the end of the day. Couple of customer use cases. I will share these slides afterwards. So and some more real customer success stories and use cases. But in the interest of time, we will move on. Just a couple of quick questions here. These are all hardware with Microsoft software on it. Yes. So Azure Stack Hub it's purpose built. So it's a validated. Think about Azure Stack Hub as an appliance. This is where the relationship with the hardware partner comes in. It's not a hardware. So Azure Stack Hub, let me just switch back here so there's no confusion. So Azure Stack Hub is not a hardware and separate software sale. It comes with everything that you need to run Azure. So it's almost like an appliance that you would wheel into the data center. So if you ordered Azure Stack Hub, it's the right solution. We've went through all the, the qualification and so on. The relationship with your customer would include you with your partner or customer, with Microsoft and the hardware partner, and we work on it as a joint engagement essentially. And when Azure Stack Hub is deployed, it comes deployed by the hardware partner with everything that it needs to run Azure. So there's no reliance on you as a customer or your end customers to deploy the software for Stack Hub. It's not a hardware and separate software sale, it's an appliance. He's got it. Good stuff. Second one from Stuart. So has Microsoft any future plans to integrate migration tools into Arc VM to container conversion? I subscribe to Ignite next week. There might be some cool stuff that you could benefit from next week. But yes, I mean, I'm asked a similar question with all things stack related as well. So from Stack HCI, Stack Hub, how can we help customers modernize and migrate? Can we shift them from, a VMware estate into, Stack or Stack Hub or Stack HCI? How easily can we do it? Can we use Azure Migrate and so on? The answer is we're working on all of the above. We want to make it as easy as possible to convert and migrate into Azure, whether it's at public Azure or whether it's a form of Azure on premises. So yeah, some cool stuff coming next week. So I'd watch out for some of the ARC sessions next week at Ignite. Yeah, Paul. So extended security updates for Windows Server and SQL Server 2008 applies to Stack Hub as well as public Azure. Also applies to Stack HCI as well, which we're just about to touch on. So if you migrate those workloads into Azure Stack Hub or Azure Stack HCI, you will benefit from those additional extended security updates. So good point, Paul. Thanks for that. So Stack HCI, so very similar to Stack Hub in the sense that under the hood, it's software defined. So storage space is direct. It's built on a foundation of Hyper-V, but purpose built. And yeah, very, very, very similar from a software defined perspective, but not the same. Azure Stack HCI is not it's not Azure. It's not full Azure on its own. Azure Stack HCI, the new version, I'm going to refer to the new version of Azure Stack HCI, and I'll send around some more info after this. So there's the current version of Azure Stack HCI is built on storage spaces direct, software-defined networking from the Server 2019 stack, and a version of Hyper-V on validated hardware. And you manage it from Windows Admin Center. You can still register it against public Azure, and there's a level of management in public Azure. Now there's a new version of Azure Stack HCI, which is kind of what I'll refer to going forward in the next 5-10 minutes. Azure Stack HCI, it's called 20H2, but it's essentially, if you think about it as a purpose-built Azure delivered hybrid cloud service. Now, what I mean by that is that, yes, it's a virtualization, hyperconverged virtualization platform that runs on-premise, but when registered to Azure, it's delivered from Azure and you register it against an Azure subscription. So your Azure Stack HCI cluster, however many you might have or wherever they might be, show up as resources in the public Azure portal. Now, it's Arc that's the brains on a lot of what's going on under the hood there, and that's why you've seen very briefly Azure Stack HCI showing up as an option on the Arc page that I showed earlier as preview. But Arc is the brains of that. But what that means is that now with a purpose-built Azure Stack hyper-converged virtualization platform, we can then start to take advantage of those hybrid services. So we can register against Azure. We can start to take advantage of a cloud native commercial model. So you pay as you consume. So you pay for only the physical cores that you use in the system. And if you choose to use some public Azure services, so things like Azure Migrate, Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, Log Analytics, Update Management, all of those services are all very possible and easy to use with virtual machines running on Azure Stack HCI on premises, but registered against an Azure subscription. So think about Azure Stack HCI as a purpose-built OS, because that's what it is now. You're not going to see Hyper-V anywhere. You're not going to see Server 2019 anywhere on there. If you use PowerShell or when you boot the thing up, you will see Azure Stack HCI because it is its own operating system. It's purpose-built to be the best in class hyperconverged virtualization platform. The value adds here really are the hybrid services. So the fact that we register against an Azure subscription gives us that cloud native experience. So we can, again, from the Azure portal, we can manage our clusters. We can very soon we'll be able to deploy VMs. We can back up and migrate VMs from a cluster on Azure Stack HCI on-premise into public Azure. Azure Site Recovery is the service that's enabling that. But lots of the public Azure services are easily utilized in a streamlined fashion by this hybrid cloud service. And this is, again, more evidence of our investment and our commitment to the hybrid portfolio is that Azure Stack HCI is now a purpose-built operating system delivered from Azure. Because we understand that customers have got experience, skill sets, existing investments in virtualization platforms, tool sets to manage them, automation tools, to automate deployment and so on of these virtualization platforms. We want to build on that and start to bring some of the innovation of Azure, but maintaining and utilizing existing investments in people, skills, and technology. And just lastly, I will. Questions there. Is Stack HCI aimed as a direct Nutanix or other HCI vendor competitor? It's aimed as a purpose-built hybrid cloud service, but of course, right, it's a hyperconverged virtualization platform. So we, on my engagements, yes, I see these out there, but I guess my focus, kind of keep my Microsoft hat on and say, and honestly, it's genuine from me anyway, is that, I think we differentiate there in the fact that something I haven't mentioned actually is that when we talk about Stack HCI, let me just jump back a second, is that yes, it's a virtualization platform. Yes, it's hyperconverged. And yes, we have competitors that have what sounds like similar solutions. Where we differentiate is the hybrid story and the ease of use of those public Azure services. Now, I think about Azure Stack HCI as an Azure conversation. Again, go back to what I said at the very start is that, we lead with Azure. And if that's not possible for those many reasons, then we work our way back. Now, Azure Stack HCI, if you're not intending to use any of the public Azure services and it's purely a virtualization platform, then Azure Stack HCI, the new version at least, might not be the best solution for you. It might be, Hyper-V or something else. So I think to answer that is really about it has to fall within, for me certainly, the new version of HCI has to fall within an overall public Azure conversation. And just a very brief update on Azure Stack Edge. So Azure Stack Edge is hardware accelerated machine learning device. So it's a 1U box. We have a couple of SKUs now for that. So we have a GPU device and an FPGA device. We have a couple of form factors as well. So we have a commercial box, which I'll just quickly jump back to. And we have a ruggedized series as well. So you can see it's a 1U box. Something I didn't mention about HCI actually is that it's a minimum of 2 nodes and scales to 16. And we can have multiples of 16 as well, multiple clusters. These can be stretched across data centers for redundancy as well, which I didn't also mention. So Stack Edge, multiple, we have a couple of SKUs and we have some other form factors for ruggedized and tactical versions as well. Now, Stack Edge is a hardware as a service offering, so there's no relationship with a hardware partner here. It's all Microsoft supported and delivered. So think about Stack Edge as like any other Azure service, albeit it's a piece of hardware that runs on-prem or at your location. It's about providing compute to the edge, so we can run basic style VMs. We can run containers either in, it's actually IoT Edge that runs on this device, so we can run Docker containers and so on there. We will have support for Kubernetes clusters imminently, actually. So as part of the compute deployment, we will we will deploy a Kubernetes cluster, so those containerized apps we can run there at the compute at the edge. It's also a storage gateway, so if you want to, it used to be in the DataBox family actually, so it used to be called DataBox Edge. So it's about, it can also shift data from on-prem to cloud if you need it to, and it's an Azure managed appliance. So I mentioned that already. It's ordered, consumed, and operated from public Azure like any other Azure service. The use cases very, very quickly. I know I've burnt through my own time already. But really the use cases for Stack Edge are about the IoT type workloads and those machine learning workloads at the edge where latency is a real challenge, or it's a real requirement for your applications. We need real-time results, so worker safety, predictive maintenance. These are the types of use cases that we have with Stack Edge. Last slide, I promise. These are the types of scenarios that we're looking at. So these are kind of smart city scenarios. But if you think about this kind of vision cognitive service use case, containerized application, identifying pedestrians and vehicles from drone footage, we can deploy Stack Edge closer to where that data is being generated for pretty much real-time results, so that we can act upon or predict and then act upon something that's going to happen, or kind of similar here actually, where we're from traffic camera feeds, detecting collisions or near collisions, so that we can actually act upon that. We can store data on these devices as well, so that we can have someone analyzing what actually happened, and then we can push only the interesting data back into Azure for retraining of an AI model or further analysis. And then lastly here, of course, we can blur that data, so we can only the data we want to send, anonymized data that we want to send, will move into Azure for that further analysis and retraining of the model. So this is a smart city use case, but think about the fact that we can deploy a piece of hardware at the edge, run a containerized AI application at the edge for real-time results. We can take this to oil rigs for predictive maintenance, worker safety. We've got manufacturing plants that are doing some predictive maintenance as well, but also taking video feeds in and then acting upon collisions and so on there as well. So very similar design and architecture we can take to multiple verticals and multiple use cases. And that's a very, very quick hybrid overview. I hope it wasn't too solution specific, but I wanted to give you the main bits about Azure Arc, and also some insight into the Azure Stack family. Hopefully gives you some food for thought, and happy to take any questions offline after a break, or reach out via Phil and the team or directly to me. No problem at all.